Okay, Rabbi Sai. We continue our discussion of the Talmud's analysis of how we understand human suffering. And in the previous portion, we talked about the idea that whoever is involved in the study of Torah, that creates space between him and his suffering and gives perspective within the suffering. The Talmud questions this. He brought this, we talked about the idea of the suffering being wings, ein uf ela Torah. And Rabbi Yochanan said, Ho afilu tinoko shel Yisraban yodinoso. This is known even by children who are studying in school, and they're studying Torah for the first time. It's in Sefer Shemos. Vayomer im shamoa tishma lekol Hashem Elokecha v'hayosher beinov ta'aseh kol hamachlo asher samti b'Mitzrayim lo asim alecha. That says that if you will hearken to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is just in His eyes, then all of the illnesses which I have placed upon Egypt I will not place upon you, because I am God your healer. So this then speaks of a very explicit, right? The verse that Reish Lakish had brought in the previous section was quite an involved analysis of a rather obscure verse, not in the 5 books of Moses in the Torah, but in the Kesuvim, in Mishlei, and in Eov, which the average school child wouldn't know. This, however, is a direct, explicit statement in Parshas Beshalach in the Torah that would be learned by any school child. Why not bring that more straightforward example? And so he says no. Rather, what I must say is Kol she'efsher lo lasok b'Torah. There's another level of removing suffering, or there's another level of potential suffering that a person could have, which is Kol she'efsher lo lasok b'Torah ve'eino osek. If a person has the capacity to study Torah and does not do so, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevi olav yisurin mechuarin ve'ochrin oso. God brings upon him hideous suffering that make him hideous, that make him ugly. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Ne'elamti dumia hechashesi. I was silent, I held my quiet, hechashesi mitov, uche'evi ne'echar, and my pain was intense. But the Hebrew word ne'echar also has the same root as me'uchar, ugly. My pain was intense, my pain was excruciating, my pain was hideous. And of course, hechashesi mitov, I kept my quiet from good, ein tov ela Torah. That refers to a person who held their tongue when they could have spoken Torah and instead involved themselves in lesser things. So we have then 2 levels of suffering. One is the suffering that is experienced by the average person, which if a person is on the right path, there's a certain degree of positivity in their life that they, as we discussed in the previous portion, they have merits, they have strength, they have blessing in their life by doing good. However, there is a next level in which a person has the capacity to be a scholar and doesn't involve themselves in what they could do. And this is a different type of suffering that's called Yisurim B'chorim. And what I think it might mean is that there is a suffering that just by the very experience of suffering, it makes a person stronger. And it helps us grow. And the suffering itself teaches us. Just by the experience. But there is another degree of suffering which is really needs to be consciously and intentionally thought of in order to have the the right perspective and the right transformative approach to it. And this is called the difference between ugliness and beauty, in which in ugliness and beauty, two people can look exactly the same. But one person who presents themselves properly will look different than a person who presents themselves improperly. And this is not suffering of the physical sort, this is suffering of the psychological sort. It's a suffering of intention, not of experience. So that the person, again, it's the same face, it's the same person, it's the same body, but because of the way they organize themselves, they present a completely different look. And so this is, when a person is on the level of a scholar, they are given by Hashem life lessons and experiences that we need to organize ourselves intellectually, mentally. We need to direct our intentions in order to be able to uplift that. And this is only possible for such a person, meaning God, and what's remarkable about this is that it speaks specifically about kol she'ef shelo la'asek b'Torah, which suggests that there is not a across-the-board judgment of people. God doesn't, as I said many times, God didn't give the Torah to the world like a book that we open and read, and it's speaking to all of humanity in the same way. Hashem gave the Torah, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. And he speaks in the Ten Commandments in the singular form. We just read it this past week's Parsha, in the Torah reading this past week. God speaks to each of us in the singular form. And on a very literal sense, the Torah is, you might say, like a book of recipes that each person in their circumstance and in their experience would have to turn to the Torah to apply the Torah to their life. And thus the Torah speaks to each person in their own level, in their own time, to their own ability. And in this sense too, we could also think about it in the larger sense that God judges each of us and provides each of us our own tailor-made life experience, which is designed for our ability to decipher and to transform. And so there's a specific life experience which is given to the person who is intellectually endowed, that they should be able to, that their particular avoda, their particular struggle in life would be to organize themselves, to organize their life according to divine understanding. And if we don't do this, what we remain with is ugliness. We have a sort of slightly skewed, just a little off. One of the commentaries on Yisurim Mechoarim is that it speaks specifically to poverty. And what's remarkable about poverty, says the Ben Yehoyada, is that when you look at someone who is poor, if he has a ring on his finger, you'll assume that it's, with a stone in it, you'll assume that it's cubic zirconium or it's glass. And if you have a wealthy person and he has a ring on his finger with a stone in it, you'll assume that it's a flawless diamond. Which is to say that it's not the specifics of the experience that determine the nature of, it's not the specifics of the circumstance that determine the nature of our experience. It's the specifics of our interpretation of the experience, of the circumstance, that will determine our experience. Similar to how we look at a wealthy person and we assume, the suit he's wearing must be tailor-made. And we look at a poor person, even if it's a good suit, it must be, polyester, JCPenney, with no offense to JCPenney. And so I think the lesson for us is that, first of all, we have to be able to look in the mirror and be honest. And know, what is my capacity? What is my ability? Am I doing the best I can to set myself up to have the right intentions in life? Am I spending enough time in improving my spiritual perspective? And the other thing that a person can take from this, I believe, is to remember that if, in a sense, the more sensitive a person's mind is, the more subtle a person's ability to understand things, the more spiritually minded a person is, there's a whole category of struggles that only apply to intelligent and sensitive people. And it is the nature of the suffering, it's specifically through that intelligence and sensitivity, which on one hand is our vulnerability, but on the other hand we can use that same sensitive and intelligent mind to reframe our experiences so that our life is not ugly, but that it's deeply complex. Not complicated, but complex. That it's not senseless, but transcendent. That it's not painful, but it's transformative. Or say not awkward, but transformative. And so we can use this intelligent mind, this sensitive mind, which is the Torah study mind, to properly think about these things. But if we don't, that same sensitive and intelligent mind can, God forbid, be struggling with so much anxiety and head games and all kinds of mental and emotional and spiritual struggles, which just to conclude with a story, there was once a young man who was from a very fine family, all Torah observant Jews, committed to the faith. And this young man, this goes back to the early 19th century, started to leave the community, and he started to hang out with, the young people of his day, the nobles and this. And so he got very into horse racing. This was the thing, the noble kids, that's what they did. Like today they run around with fancy cars, then they ran around with fancy horses. And so the father came to the Rebbe, he says, "Would you please speak to my son?" So the Rebbe said, "Sure." So the young man comes into the Rebbe and he says, "No, so tell me, what are you into?" The young man is taken aback. He thought that the Rebbe is going to right away start giving him a lecture. And he says, well, he figured, listen, I'm going to put it on the table. He says, "Rabbi, I got to tell you, I've gotten really into horse racing. You got to check out these quarter horses and the Arabian, what do you call them? Something else." So the Rebbe says, "What's so good about a quarter horse? What's so good about an Arabian horse? What's so special about it?" He said, "Rebbe, you understand, with a regular workhorse can only travel a mile. It takes him, 15 minutes. But an Arabian horse, in 5 minutes you can travel 2 miles. And what's so good about that?" He says, "You imagine, you want to go from what he thinks the Rebbe doesn't understand. He says, you can imagine, you can go from one city to another. Normally it takes you 2 hours. You can get there in a half an hour." The Rebbe says, "That's all good if you're on the right road. But what if you're on the wrong road? You get much more lost, much faster." So the young man understood the message. And he says, "Ah, Rebbe, but with the right horse, if you get very lost very fast, you can also find yourself back on the right road much faster." So, if you're driving down the highway on the wrong way, 60 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour, you get very lost very fast, but you can also turn around just as fast. So, to each of us our own, may Hashem give us the wisdom and the strength to be able to see the way out and to have the fortitude to push ourselves in the right direction.